Let me open by saying that there are no spoilers to the new Star Wars movie in this sermon. There are minor spoilers to the last Star Wars movie if you haven't seen that one, so fair warning there. This sermon has a little bit of a genesis to it. It was originally preached by invitation at All Souls Unitarian Church about a month ago. And what happened was Reverend Zinke of All Souls and I were having lunch together, as we do from time to time, and she mentioned that All Souls was doing this sermon series on Star Wars, and she said she personally was not a big Star Wars person and didn't know that much about it, and so she was looking for people to preach. And did I know anything about Star Wars? She wanted to know. Well, one day in the summer of 1977, I remember my older brother had a friend over for a weekend sleepover, and my mom was wanting to do something like fun and special for the weekend, so she suggested that we all go see a matinee movie. And this was a treat when I was growing up. We didn't have a lot of money. Movies were a relatively rare event. And back in that day, going to a movie meant like you had to get out the newspaper, right, and like scan back to the movie section and see what was actually playing. And my brother and his friends settled on this weird new movie called Star Wars. And the whole ad was just the word Star Wars in like this weird font. And my mom didn't usually approve of anything with the word war, like right in the title. But for whatever reason, she took us all to see it. I was like 5.5. And what I remember is that there were robots, and it was boring. That was my first experience of Star Wars, mostly boring plus robots. But then in the summer of 1978, Star Wars was re-released into theaters, which was the only way you could see a movie again back in the day before VCRs and DVD players and streaming and all that. So I went to see it again, and I was 6.5. And it blew my mind. I was transported. I was transformed. It changed the trajectory of my childhood. And from that day forward, every swing set was an X-Wing fighter. Every bicycle was an X-Wing fighter. And every stick or paper towel tube or just like vaguely oblong object was a lightsaber or a blaster. I collected the action figures. I read the comic books. I even had a Star Wars soundtrack album to play on my red plastic Fisher-Price record player in my bedroom. So when Reverend Zinke asked me over lunch if I knew anything about Star Wars and would I be willing to preach on it at All Souls, I said, do Minox like power cables? Is Tosche Station your one-stop shop for power converters? Did Han Solo definitely shoot first? Heck, yes, I will preach on Star Wars. Actually, I just said yes, because the other thing would have been a little weird. Star Wars provided the mythology for my childhood, and the central figure of that mythology was the hero Luke Skywalker, whose journey from farm boy to galactic hero to Jedi Knight was consciously crafted by George Lucas, based on his reading of Joseph Campbell to mimic the archetypal hero's journey found in mythology. That was very consciously done. So in young Luke, we see a longing for meaning and purpose in his life. We see a yearning for bigger life and broader horizons. We see him embrace a great cause in the name of freedom and justice. We see him discover and learn to master his own power, confront his own capacity for darkness, and ultimately triumph through his willingness to sacrifice himself and his belief in the transformative power of love. And through it all, the traits that most characterize Luke Skywalker are his optimism, his unswerving loyalty to his friends and to his cause, and his courage, his never-give-up attitude, and his essential goodness. And it's all grounded in his relationship to the Force, which is a sort of nebulous concept that stands for the life-giving spirit found in interconnectedness, in growth, and in renewal. So the original trilogy of Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, spanned my childhood from age 6 to age 11. So I was like perfectly situated for it. And Luke Skywalker was the figure more than any other who informed my childhood understanding of what the word hero meant. Now, as you may have heard, there's a new Star Wars movie that came out just a few weeks ago, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, which has been billed as the end of the Skywalker saga. I had been waiting all year for it. It arrived on December 20th, which was coincidentally my 48th birthday. What? Oh, thank you. Was I excited for this movie? Do Hutts love pod racing? Does Boba Fett love bounty hunting? Do we wish in retrospect that George Lucas had had just a little more clarity on Luke and Leia's relationship earlier in the creative process? Heck yes, I was excited for this movie. But here's a funny thing. Back in like October, November, a few months before the movie came out, my Facebook feed started filling up with all these ads for the new movie that was coming out. For the Gen Zers in the congregation, Facebook is like Instagram, but your aunt is on it. Anyway, when I clicked on the comments for these ads for this movie that I was terribly excited to see, I was seeing a lot of comments like this, which I'm not making up. These are real comments from Star Wars fans made before the new movie came out. Comment number 1, no thank you. No thank you. It's really sad that I'm not excited for this. 2 weeks until utter disappointment. Sigh, I really can't at this point even hope for a good movie. Maybe Luke will wake up like in the TV show Dallas and it will be revealed all of these horrible changes were a dream. I can't wait to be disappointed again. The travesty ends, the shame will live forever. I want to see this like I want the flu. Please, Disney, just stop already. And finally, 2 weeks and Disney will destroy Star Wars forever. Destroy Star Wars forever. Those are some strong feelings. So what is going on here? Well, what is going on in part, is that the last Star Wars movie, Episode 8, called The Last Jedi, presented the audience with an entirely different image of Luke Skywalker than the one that I grew up with. The setup is that an evil empire is once again threatening the entire galaxy. Luke Skywalker is nowhere to be found, and the members of the Resistance are sure that if only they can find the great hero Luke Skywalker and convince him to come back, he will return and save the galaxy. So a young woman who is strong in the Force finally tracks down Luke Skywalker to this distant planet, and she finds not the hero of legend, but she finds a broken man. Turns out that Luke Skywalker had tried to train a new order of Jedi, only to accidentally resurrect the forces of evil in a moment of personal weakness, and he dooms his own sister's son in the process. And he blames this catastrophic failure on his own hubris, on coming to believe in the myth of his own greatness, since he is so racked with guilt over his own failure that he has exiled himself. He's run away, he's turned his back on his friends and on a suffering galaxy. And worse, he's turned his back on the Force. He's disconnected himself from everything that nurtures and sustains life and hope. And so for many people who were deeply invested in Luke Skywalker as a hero, this twist in the story felt almost like a personal betrayal. Like, Luke Skywalker would never do that, right? Luke Skywalker does not give up. He does not abandon his friends. He doesn't feel bitterness. He doesn't break. And this idea hit some people like on a visceral level, and they responded with anger, like something important had been taken away from them. And interestingly enough, this turn in the story and the conflicting emotions that it had evoked in people is very reminiscent to me of a powerful conversation that is happening right now within Unitarian Universalism. And that conversation is precisely about failure and brokenness and how well our own faith prepares us to deal with these things. Unitarian Universalism is a famously optimistic religious tradition. The great Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing, who founded this tradition, expressed his belief in the innate goodness of humanity and in our ability as individuals to rise through our own efforts, even, he said, unto likeness unto God. The transcendentalists took this idea of heroic individualism and innate human goodness, and they ran with it. And they taught that we, each of us, have direct access to the divine, like Luke Skywalker connecting to the Force. They taught that the creative fire of the universe practically sings in our blood. It sings in our imagination. It is just waiting for us to express it. And then our humanist tradition has always believed in the near limitless power of the human mind and the human spirit, especially as expressed through reason and science and technology and new forms of social organization. We are a people who have expressed our conviction in every generation that problems can be solved, that challenges can be overcome, that the veil of ignorance and prejudice can be lifted, and that a better world can be created right here on earth if only we try hard enough, if we apply our reason, if we create a better system, if we show up. Right, in 1886, Unitarian minister James Freeman Clarke summarized the spirit of Unitarianism as a belief in the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. Using the sexist language of his day, the progress of humanity onward and upward forever, that is an optimistic religion. Infinite progress is what awaits us. So UU minister Nancy MacDonald Ladd, in her book, After the Good News, put it this way. All of this carried with it a tendency towards a kind of triumphalism in our understanding of time, history, and human potential. Kind of triumphalism. The story we told indicated that things were pointed in the right direction, and we, the mostly white, highly educated, and politically progressive religious liberals of our era, were surely the very ones to serve as the nation's moral compass. In other words, UUs have traditionally positioned ourselves as the heroes in a story that we have been telling about progress in history. Heroes like Luke Skywalker, who carry the day with optimism and commitment and courage, who see justice triumph, who win in the end. MacDonald Ladd points out that taken as a whole, the members of our religious tradition enjoy a lot of privilege. Mostly white, mostly highly educated. And when you have a lot of privilege, here are some ideas that may seem natural to you. I can be anything I want to be. If there is a problem facing me, it can be solved eventually if only I work hard and try again. If I put my mind to something, I expect to succeed. And conversely, if you're used to succeeding, what kind of problems do you tend to take on? The ones that you can solve. Otherwise, what's the point? But what happens when a people whose worldview naturally expects success, who are inheritors of a religious tradition of boundless optimism, are challenged by the values of that very same religious tradition to embrace inevitable failure? Failure. Because as UUs, we are part of a covenant to live out 7 principles, and increasingly we see those principles are calling us collectively and by necessity to take on some of the deepest, hardest problems that there are. Problems that we will not solve in our lifetime. For example, our congregation, along with many UU congregations all over the country, has made an increasing commitment to make anti-racism work part of what we do, right? To confront institutional racism and white supremacy culture wherever it lives, out in the world, here in our congregation, in our own hearts, in our lives. I believe that this is work that our Unitarian Universalist principles call all of us to do, necessarily as the meaning of living out our faith, and I believe that we are going to fail. Because do you know what we are not going to do in our lifetimes? End racism. End toxic masculinity. End homophobia or transphobia. Pick an ism that divides and separates people and name some people as less worthy, we are not going to heal those divides in our lifetime. It's not going to happen. And even in our attempt to move the ball forward, even in trying to just lay one more brick in the foundation of the beloved community, we are going to find ourselves failing repeatedly. This is not a game, Nancy MacDonald Ladd tells her own people about the struggle to end racism, and we are not going to win. Because this is really hard work, and no one knows how to do it exactly. And even with good faith and the best of intentions, we get it wrong sometimes. And when we get it wrong, it often doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like a beautiful failure, right? Getting it wrong often feels like being confronted with our own prejudices or our own privilege or our own enmeshment in systems that cause harm. It feels like painful missteps, errors, mistakes, confusions, missed opportunities, and this slow, painfully slow, marginal progress. It feels like confronting our own brokenness. Now, everything that I've said about the fight against racism could be said equally about the other great challenge of our lifetime, which is climate change. The enormity of the challenge stymies our ability even to comprehend it, let alone solve it, and yet, who among us is not also entangled in its perpetuation? What do we do when everywhere we turn, we find ourselves part of the problem that we want to solve? For such times and for such problems, optimism is not enough. Confidence and courage are not enough. What we need are spiritual practices of resilience, because in order for Unitarian Universalists to tackle the really deep problems, in order for us to be a part of the deep healing that the world is crying out for, we have to give up our historic illusion of our heroism, our spiritual addiction to success. What will be important will not be our success. When success seems so far out of hand, what is important is our resilience, our ability to keep going when there is no success, when success seems like a dream and maybe even a distant dream, when we don't even know what success looks like, our ability to keep going, and crucially, when we have lost the illusion of our own innocence, of our own simple heroism in this story of progress, can we keep going? As a beginning step, I would ask you to think about what are the practices of resilience in your own life, the simple everyday practices that begin to build our capacity to respond to setbacks. And some of these can be deceptively mundane. For example, just getting a decent night's sleep is a resilience practice. But we live in a chronically sleep-deprived and overworked culture. And beyond just sleep, honoring our need for rest writ large, for like taking care of our bodies and getting adequate exercise and nutrition, taking care of our emotional needs for recharging. These are resilience practices. But there's a layer of privilege just in my naming that, right? Because some people don't have access to these things for economic reasons. They don't have access to rest. They don't have access perhaps to nutritious food or health care or whatever it is. So how do you build a more resilient society? Fight for people's access to these basic things. What other practices build resilience? What about practices like meditation or prayer or journaling, gardening, nature walks, music or art, time spent with family? I encourage you, reflect on the elements of your life that ground you, that energize you, that keep you open to possibility and sustain you through challenges. This is a time for all of us to be more intentional in cultivating these practices. They are not indulgences. This is what is going to get us through. This is what is going to get us through. And in thinking about resilience, we may find ourselves turning increasingly to the wisdom of marginalized communities, particularly to the experiences of marginalized communities within our own UU communities, who have much to teach us on this score. Womanist theologians, for example, construct theologies of resilience out of the raw experiences of the lives of African American women who had to learn to sustain love and hope and family over generations with everything stacked against them, with all of the odds stacked against them, facing the most oppressive conditions imaginable. They face the problem of making a way out of no way. And one of the practices of resilience offered by womanist theology is just being able to name our pain in a way that is vulnerable and real. Womanist scholar Elaine Crawford, in her book Hope in the Holler, talks about this deep cry of pain and rage that she calls the holler, that for marginalized people is a refusal to be silenced. It is their demand that their pain be witnessed and that their humanity be dignified. And in her theistic context, it is also a challenge to God to respond to that pain. In a Unitarian Universalist context, we talk about the loss of rituals of lament in our worship. A ritual of lament is a way for us to collectively name our pain. The pain we feel, for example, about the harm done daily to our Mother Earth, including the pain of knowing that we are caught up in that harm. A ritual of lament might help us to collectively name our pain at the ways in which our own UU history has fallen short of our desire to build the beloved community. The pain of the racism we see in our own tradition and in our own institutions, and the pain of knowing that we are the inheritors of those same institutions. If we cannot even name our pain, we cannot begin to heal it. We cannot move through it. We cannot respond with resilience. We can't heal and make amends. And yet all too often the optimistic, can-do, never-say-die culture of liberal religion, the culture that believes in its myths about its own heroism, is a culture in which we perform perfectionism for one another. It's a culture in which we want to be seen as strong and together, in which we hesitate to name our own pain and brokenness, in which our instinct is always to say, I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, we got this, instead of being honest about the places where we don't got this. So my final note for this sermon is to reflect on the importance of building up our congregations as communities of resilience. There's a reason we live out our religious tradition in community, and it's because we need each other. We are none of us isolated beings. We did not get here alone, and we are not going forward alone. Fred Rogers used to have a practice of asking people, who loved you into being? He would ask people, who loved you into being? Take a second right now and think about that. Who loved you into being who you are? And who's been a sustaining source of courage and strength and inspiration to you at a time when your own courage was flagging? Coming back to our movie, in the movie The Last Jedi, there's a moment in the film when Luke Skywalker is about to turn completely away from the Force, from his connection to life and possibility, when he is truly about to give up for good. And his mentor, Yoda, appears. And Yoda urges Luke to see the strength in his own brokenness. He says, pass on what you have learned, pass on strength and mastery, but weakness and folly and failure also. Failure most of all. The greatest teacher, he says, failure is. So his mentor, arriving at this crucial moment, reconnects him to his spiritual community and reconnects him to the Force, his source of resilience. And in the movie, this allows Luke Skywalker, as the broken hero, to make one final reappearance in the story, to breathe new life and new hope into the galaxy. Resilience breeds resilience. And there is no neat and tidy conclusion in the movie. There's no easy victory in the story, but hope lives on. We all have moments when we need these connections to one another, when our resilience has depended so crucially on the right word or the right touch, or even a smile or a phone call, a word of advice, a lift home from the right person. Community builds resilience. This community builds resilience. The poet Robert Walsh said, when the ground breaks under your feet, trust the tensile strands of love that bend and stretch to hold you in the web of life that's often torn but always healing. Love will keep us together. As a community, may we learn to find our strength and resilience in the strands of love that bind us together, and may this give us the courage to take big risks, risks worthy of our great love for the world, risks worthy of failure, risks worthy of the larger vision of our UU tradition. Blessed be, and amen.